You know how almost every sitcom has that one moment where they make up a fake video game, but because the writers are all old people, they come up with the most ridiculous shit ever? There's no way I can feasibly describe Omega Boost without making it sound like one of those games. No, seriously, like you'd see a few seconds of it on the TV, and then Marge would come in and say, "What are you doing, Bart?" And then Bart would look directly at the audience and say, "Don't have a cow, Mom, I'm playing Omega Boost." Okay, that was a dumb joke and it was really bad, but I'm still pretty sure that it's about on par with what the actual writers of The Simpsons have come up with over the last decade. From the FMV cutscenes to the licensed 90s soundtrack, almost every part of the Omega Boost experience feels like it belongs in a parody instead of a real product. When your game is about piloting a giant mecha that uses time travel to hunt down a genocidal computer virus from 1945, it's a bit hard to take it seriously. Luckily, I discovered Omega Boost when I was a child, and my tiny heart still had the capacity for joy and bewilderment back then. And that's a good thing, because even though Omega Boost sounds like it should be a complete farce, it's secretly one of my favorite PlayStation games. Seriously, just watch this bit from the intro real quick and tell me that it isn't great. Fuck yeah. That's cool, right? I first experienced Omega Boost from one of those PlayStation Underground demo discs from back in the day, and I begged my parents for weeks before they finally caved in and bought it for me, and I loved it. Since then, I've replayed it maybe every year or two, and each time I'm surprised by how well it holds up. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been smitten with the mecha fantasy, and with a good decade and a half of experience behind me, I still find myself fascinated by the versatility of the genre. Throughout the years, creative teams have used giant robots to tell stories that comment on many facets of the human experience, from war and mental health to idealism and the spirit of competition. And while game developers have managed to do the same, I feel that they've done so less successfully than creators in other mediums. As much as I love the idea of mecha video games, the truth is I haven't spent as much time with them as I would like to admit. But is that really so surprising? It seems like every studio attempting to bring this genre into an interactive medium approaches the adaptation process from a different angle, but it seems like most of these attempts end up flopping at worst or finding a niche but dedicated following at best. I think that's a shame. I'm sure that there are plenty of mecha games out there that even dedicated genre enthusiasts aren't aware of, and that sucks. Critical analysis of obscure games is something I want to see more of in general on the internet, but mecha games in particular interest me because of their struggle to receive mainstream recognition regardless of their quality. I want to examine how these games utilize their stories, control schemes, and gameplay mechanics to emulate the mecha experience. I want to see why so many of these games fail, and most importantly, I want to highlight the best the genre has to offer, and explore what these games got right compared to what others got wrong. So, what better place to start than the first mecha game I ever played? Sit on down, strap on in, and get ready to launch, because there's a lot of these fucking things and we don't have all day. My name is Rosin, and it's time to submit our very first mech report. I wasn't joking at the start of this video when I said that Omega Boost's plot is downright absurd. The intro gives you a pretty good idea of the game's premise, but the real story can be found in the game's manual. In the future, humanity finds itself at war with an evil artificial intelligence named AlphaCore, and mankind is losing badly. In a last-ditch effort to prevent the apocalypse, scientists develop time travel technology to go back to the past and destroy the AlphaCore before it gains power. But, as we all know, nothing can escape the eyes of the almighty algorithm, and AlphaCore steals the technology for itself. It builds a giant machine called the Time Shaft on a desolate planet and uses it to go back in time to 1945. There, it hunts down ENIAC, one of the first electronic computers ever made, and installs itself onto the machine as a virus. This creates a time loop paradox in which AlphaCore is responsible for its own creation and is at risk of altering the course of human history. But that's where our protagonist comes in. Lester J. Hemming is tasked with piloting the time-traveling mecha, the Omega Boost, and going back to 1945 to destroy the infant version of AlphaCore to break the time loop and prevent its rise to power in the first place. Yeah, it's an awful lot of backstory for a game that's otherwise about flying around space and blowing up robots, but the convoluted time travel plot is a big part of the charm for me. It's like someone saw Terminator and was like, yeah, fuck it, I think I can do something like that too. The ridiculous premise is only part of the reason why Omega Boost feels so over the top, however. The game's structure is particularly arcade-like in nature, catering to high scores and level rankings long after it was in vogue to do so. Proficient Omega Boost play is as much about memorization and repetition as it is about frantic movement and quick shooting. It feels like it was made by the type of people who loved the quarter-munching and leaderboard-topping thrills of older games. You know, the kinds of games that were on their way out at this time as arcades closed up shop and consoles skyrocketed in popularity. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either. Omega Boost feels a lot like a classic shmup in plenty of ways, from the 10-second countdown timer after you die to the screen-clearing super move you can fall back on in a pinch. Just don't come in expecting the lighthearted, upbeat tunes of your favorite arcade classics, because Omega Boost casts them all aside in favor of a more aggressive hard rock and metal vibe. The soundtrack includes numerous licensed songs from bands like Static X and Loudmouth. As a recovering edgelord and 90s kid, I have to admit I love this game's soundtrack to death, but even I have to admit it doesn't always feel complimentary to what's happening on screen. With all this in mind, Omega Boost feels like it should be a bizarre mess of a game, but I think it's to the developer's credit that these elements flow together quite well when you actually sit down and play it. This game's mission statement is to let players fly around fast and blow up a lot of things at once, and it accomplishes that goal. The core of the experience just happens to be wrapped up in a variety of energetic layers, and it all comes together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Omega Boost never takes a moment to reflect on its own cheesiness or apologize for being so sincere, and I love it for that. Part of the reason the game gets away with all of this is its wonderful presentation. Because it released towards the end of the PS1's lifespan, it turns out Omega Boost really pushes the hardware to its limits. I actually remember it taking a while to get this thing running on emulators back in the day, though that's no longer a problem in 2018. I'm not much of a visual fidelity guy, but this game looks great when emulated. For this recording, I bumped up the internal resolution to run the game in HD, enabled a widescreen hack to display it in 16:9 with minimal stretching, and threw on a saber filter to clean up the textures. It looks pretty damn good, all things considered. But I guess the game's fantastic style isn't a surprise when you realize it was made by Polyphony Digital, better known for their Gran Turismo series. To craft the look of the game's robots, the studio collaborated with Macross mecha designer Shoji Kawamori, and while they aren't the most memorable designs in the world, I think the partnership paid off. Otherwise, the mechs might have looked too much like cars, and nobody would ever want that. It's also worth noting that there are several gameplay similarities between Omega Boost and the Panzer Dragoon series, particularly in how the game handles its lock-on aiming system. This is actually the direct result of the lead designer of Omega Boost, Yuji Yasuhara, having worked on Panzer Dragoon's Way for the Sega Saturn a few years prior to Omega Boost's development. You can truly feel the influence too. The rhythm of any given Omega Boost level is orchestrated by the build-up and release of your lock-on missiles, with your main gun chiming in when it has the opportunity to. Shooters of this type tend to follow a general rule in that your lock-on attack is your safer but more versatile weapon, while your primary fire is more powerful but requires an opening of some sort. While this is technically true for Omega Boost as well, your lock-on attack is pretty damn powerful as is, and the game becomes so fast-paced in later missions that using your rifle just isn't always practical against certain enemies. While I feel like this should be a problem that I would have some issue with, it never actually bothered me when I was playing the game. The game finds plenty of other ways to make your rifle useful. Certain bosses have pieces of them that are immune to one type of attack or the other, which means you'll have to master both weapons if you want to make progress. The game even lets you go into first-person mode so that you can aim the rifle more accurately. Pretty cool stuff. So, the combat is good, but what about the movement? Thankfully, Omega Boost's mobility is just as satisfying as its weaponry. You have a dedicated lock-on button that whips your camera towards whatever your next target is, and it's pretty reliable. It's easy to reorient yourself if the action ever gets a bit too wild for you. The Omega Boost is highly maneuverable, and you have a dash button that doubles as a dodge. Whenever you take damage, it almost always feels like it was because you screwed up in some way and not because the game was being unfair. There's a real harsh impact and physicality to the collision damage in this game too. When you smash into something, your mech's AI system even chimes in. As you defeat enemies, you fill up a super meter, which you can spend to activate a powerful attack named Viper Boost. The Omega Boost goes into a super mode and flies all over the screen, destroying everything in its path. The more meter you have to spend, the longer the Viper Boost lasts. It absolutely tears through regular enemies and makes quick work of every boss in the game, but don't count on it always being available. The meter fills pretty damn slow, and as a result you're only going to be using Viper Boost a few times every playthrough. Personally, I like to play on the safe side and save it up for the final boss fight. Trust me, you're gonna need it. It's a simple set of tools, but the game is short enough that things never get stale. The only character progression you'll get is a lock-on upgrade the Omega Boost receives at the end of every mission. Depending on how high your mission rank is, the amount of homing missiles you'll be able to shoot out will be increased. The better your level rank, the better the upgrade. Unfortunately, this is also my main point of criticism with Omega Boost. The upgrade system makes Omega Boost easier for players who are already good at it and punishes those who are struggling. This is a reward paradox that is a common problem in game design, and you'll see it a lot in older games especially. While one could argue that this upgrade system encourages multiple playthroughs and encourages players to get better, it's also important to remember that the average player is only going to play through this game maybe 1 or 2 times, and I highly doubt that a few extra missiles are the incentive they need to reconsider that decision. I'm sure at least a few players were frustrated by later levels because their damage output just wasn't what it should have been because it was their first time through, and that's a shame. I think the upgrades would be better as a consistent value gained at the end of every level, not as a variable amount tied to player performance. Though, aside from the upgrades, I don't really have all that much to complain about. The levels of Omega Boost take you across time, cruising through space and blasting through robotic monstrosities on a devastated Earth. I'm going to highlight some of my favorite parts of the game from this point on, so if you'd like to experience them for yourself, before hearing me talk about them, I suggest you stop the video here, pick up a copy for yourself, and then return to this video at a later date, so that you can still hear my sweet voice in your ears and I can get more ad revenue. The game starts out simple enough, but the middle set of levels really start to test your agility and awareness. When I was younger, this huge tunnel full of obstacles was a big wake-up call for me, because it's the first challenge in the game that tested both my reflexes and my understanding of the mech's mobility. There's also a massive battle with an armada of spaceships, which is pretty fun. In general, the game does a solid job of diversifying the types of danger it throws your way. It keeps you on your toes. The final batch of missions crank the difficulty up a notch and enemies start to hit fast and hard. But before we talk about those, let's talk about this fucker. Alpha Core made its own mecha to hunt you down and named it Beta Boost. Now, anyone who knows me will tell you that the quickest way to my heart is giving me a cool rival character to repeatedly fight throughout your game. You only fight Beta Boost twice, but they're both awesome moments. The first fight happens at the end of the second level and is pretty easy. It just zips around the screen and sometimes stops to spray bullets at you. Even then, you've only fought large and slow bosses up to this point, so to suddenly fight one that's your equal in speed and size makes quite the first impression. I think the fact that the climax of this game's demo is this boss fight in particular is a testament to its quality. They knew they struck gold with this one. You can even buy a Beta Boost action figure if you want. The real fight with Beta Boost happens near the end of the game. As you'd expect, it's a lot more powerful than before. This fight can last a while longer than most other bosses in the game because Beta Boost is so damn fast that you almost never have any good openings to deal damage without taking some yourself. And then, when you finally manage to empty its life bar, it activates its own Viper Boost in a last-ditch effort to take you down. I remember hitting this part as a kid and being genuinely shocked. You see it a lot now, but the idea of a boss using your own techniques against you blew my mind as a kid. If you manage to avoid the Viper Boost onslaught for long enough, it'll blow up and you'll complete the mission. The Beta Boost fights are something I always look forward to every time I sit down to replay this game. It's a really cool concept for a rival character. Like I said, the rest of the endgame is pretty wild too. There's this other boss you have to defeat within a strict time limit by breaking off these different pieces and attacking its weak points. Then we enter the last zone and the real fun begins. The first form of the final boss is a weird gravitational physics puzzle thing. If you haven't been paying attention to the intricacies of how the game's lock-on targeting and shooting works, this boss is quite the brick wall. I'd say it's the hardest part of the game, even. You have to shoot at the Alpha Core with your main gun because it reflects any of your homing shots back at you. However, it's protected by an outer rim of satellites which suck in your shots and reflect them back. So you have to shoot these floating satellite things with your lock-on missiles to destroy them, while at the same time trying not to lock onto the main core. Then you realize it's a bad idea to destroy all the satellites, because if you do, the entire set of them respawns. So you need to leave one or two of them alive and aim your gunfire so that their gravitational force pulls them back into the core, and yeah, it's a lot. The second form is kinda boring, actually. It becomes a snake dragon thing and you race it down the corridor until you get ahead of it so you can turn around and shoot it in the face. But the third phase is where things start to get real interesting.
Warning, undefined enemies approaching.
Oh, I guess we're just fighting God now. Okay. And in case you're wondering, no, the game isn't breaking and this emulator isn't glitching. This fight has a weird blur filter put over it. Everything starts to smear together and it really gives off the impression that reality is collapsing in on itself or something. It's a nice touch that adds a lot of personality to an otherwise simple final boss battle. After we beat the Alpha Core Angel, we get a short cutscene where we go back in time and save history, and that's it. No sequel, no remakes, no remasters, no nothing. The game didn't even get a re-release as part of the PlayStation Classics program, which is a bummer. I have to imagine the licensed soundtrack is at least partially to blame here. The audience for this type of game is just too small to justify getting the rights to those songs again. Sure, you could maybe take them out, but at that point you're starting to rob the game of its personality. It'd be like going to Taco Bell without getting Baja Blast. Why even bother? My most recent playthrough of Omega Boost had me reflecting on its place in game history. It feels like the last of a dying breed in a way, like an antique from a time when larger studios could afford to take more risks and put out high-budget passion projects that were short but sweet. It's a shame, but the cost of modern game development means that a large studio would never make something like Omega Boost today. It's too much money for too niche of a product. But you know, I think I've made my peace with that. A lot of the niches once supported by AAA studios have been taken over by smaller developers and indie creators, and that might be for the best in the long run. Omega Boost might be dead, but there's a whole Space Colony worth of other mecha games for me to play, and I'm sure one of them will fill the Omega Boost-shaped hole in my heart sooner or later. And until then, I'm going to continue replaying this game once a year while also talking to myself in that Bart Simpson voice. Thanks for watching the first episode of Mech Report. If you're interested in mecha model kits, you might also like my Build and Chill videos. It's a really casual series about my experiences as an amateur builder, and I have a lot of fun making them. And if you liked this video, you may want to check out my other video reviews too. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, hope you have a good night.